so morning, everybody here, and welcome to the sixth already of our series, Everything is Energy. And a quick apology, Mareka Mokwatlo couldn't make it today, but Gary Koekemoer has kindly stepped in to continue this massively complex kind of energy conversation. Gary, as I think most of you who are up here know, is co-host of the seminar with Alex and I, and he's a close Iscia associate. He has just recently elevated his status to Dr. K with a thesis supporting or applying complexity to the concept of race. And he's now turning his sort of complexity thinking to environmental issues, which is another of his passions. So he'll be talking to us today about the technological and political ideologies that support choices about what energy sources to rely on. He'll be discussing the cases of nuclear and gas in South Africa, and I think some of the issues concerning transition to renewables. Hope that I got that right, Gary, but you can always correct me as you go along. So over to you, and thanks for stepping in.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. And thanks to everyone for the opportunity again. So I was just, whilst we were waiting, I was saying to Andrea that I could do probably a semester seminar on the one slide. So again, it's very complex area that we're talking about. And what I thought was starting to come through in some of the sessions was just some of the underlying ideology and ideas that drive choices around energy, and thought maybe it would be useful just to use nuclear and gas as an example of that. But again, on each of the components of those value chains, you could spend an entire day just explaining how it is. So I have to just rush through a whole bunch, and so hopefully I've touched on the key aspects that will just illustrate the point in terms of how decisions are made in the energy sector and how ideas and the ideology that flows from those ideas influences that. And so would be very keen to hear from others in terms of how they see it and whether they share the same ideas. So the first up is this picture. This is Koeberg nuclear plant, which is just north of Cape Town, that was built in the 80s, the late 70s, early 80s, built by the nationalists to counterbalance the grid, and has been fairly controversial from its start, and is struggling at the moment in terms of maintenance and continuing. And so I just wanted to take us through a couple of those things, but I thought maybe just to start with two relevant quotes from two fairly prominent politicians. The first is President Ramaphosa, who yesterday in the Parliament endorsed the Car Power Ship project, which is a floating gas turbine which will deliver the 9 ships will deliver 1,200 megawatts into the system, and as being fought quite strongly by environmentalists and others, economists included, because it's going to be very expensive and a long-term process. So why does he make that kind of decision, and how does he get to the point of saying this is the way to go? And then someone who's you would think is slightly differently ideologically placed to what the president is the leader of BOSA, which is a new political party. That's Musi Maimane, who used to be the DA leader until he was dismissed. And then so in their view, that the BOSA argues that the South African electric sector in the medium term, sorry, I'll just have to change the screen there. That you should go private in terms of power generation, but he then goes from calling for private power generation to looking at things like nuclear, and you'll see that he argues there very strongly that we must add 4,000 megawatts to 5,000 megawatts. So that's about the size of Medupi and Kusile. nuclear power stations built over the next 10 plus years, or modular reactors. So he's talking about modular reactors, and why is he talking about that? And how did he come to that decision? What's driving his understanding of that? So I thought maybe that would just place the context a little bit. Sorry, and then an ideology, just a brief description of what an ideology is, and there's various of that. I thought I'd just use this for this presentation. It's a set of ideas, beliefs, and attitudes. So there's three key aspects there that are held either consciously or unconsciously, and shapes your understanding of the social and political world. And it serves to recommend, so in terms of how you see the world based on those ideologies, you then make choices from that. So just to take you through, these are, I was looking through just all the basic sort of ideologies, and this was a useful one, I thought, because what it did is it puts it on a two sort of trajectories. The one is a collective system versus a private system, and then centralized versus decentralized, and places the majority of what of the labels that we use to describe various political ideas currently. And so you would have sort of to the right there's social liberalism and classical liberalism, and to the left you would have social democracy and democratic socialism, and then state socialism and libertarian capitalism. That's kind of where the world is placed at this point in time. I mean, there's a lot of debate, and this is the slide that I was saying that you could spend a semester just unpacking every component of those. But a lot of this kind of thinking is present in South Africa, and informs the decisions that we make. So what I want to do now is just take us through the two areas of gas and nuclear, and just sorry, just before doing that, I'm having difficulty seeing my there is that is just to locate it in terms of energy that we use per person. So this is per capita, and you can see that the majority of energy is used in the northern hemisphere, and people talk about north and south divide, and this gives a very good picture of that. And then the next one is, where is the greenhouse gas emissions? Greenhouse gas emissions again are concentrated in the northern hemisphere, but the burden of climate change is going to be experienced in the southern hemisphere. Okay, and then just a quick slide there just to show how our energy has increased over the periods. You'll see from the 1900s that our increase in energy starts rapidly going upwards. And you'll see from 1950 to 2021, which is where most of the damage to the climate has occurred, links to the energy choices that we've been making. And you'll see that oil, coal, and traditional biomass, so that would be wood and charcoal, are the key areas of that, with natural gas. Okay, then. So let's just take you through some of the two aspects, the gas and that. The gas process starts with exploration. So you have to find the gas before you can drill for it. This is the Amazon Warrior. It's a seismic vessel that is used at sea, and that fires pulses to the ocean floor to locate pockets of gas, and some that we are now opposing off our coastline here. And then once you've found the gas, you then drill for the gas, and this is a oil and gas platform that is used here off our shoreline, and is so it can drill up to through about 3,000 meters of water, and then a further 1,000 to 2,000 meters of rock to get to the gas deposits. So that's the an oil rig, which is familiar to most of us. And then you have fracking rigs, which is now very popular in the United States and has turned the economy around, which fracks the oil. And basically what it is it pumps water or a combination liquid into the rock and splits the rock, which allows the gas to then escape, and then it's extracted and then refined and taken out. And then it goes to, so you explore for it, you drill for it, you then take it to a refinery, you have to refine the gas or the oil, and then you ship it. And this is liquid and natural gas. What happens is that you cool it and you compress it, and then you can ship it in ships like this, and you can send it all over the world, or you put it into pipelines. And you'll know that in America and Europe, there are large pipelines of gas, and Russia with Germany and the Ukrainian war has now just interacted around their pipelines. So the pipelines has been a key geopolitical flashpoint. Once you've shipped your gas, you then put it into these massive gas plants, which generate electricity, or and looks something similar to a jet engine, or works like a petrol engine in your car, where you compress the gas and add air to it, and then you light it basically, and that drives a turbine, and that gives you your generation power. And then obviously the other one that we are more familiar with in South Africa is gas as a cooking component, and in Europe you will have it in homes in terms of heating and heating up within the house. And if you look at gas production in the world, where is gas produced? It's produced mainly in Russia and America. Those are the big spots. You'll see very little of it is produced in sub-Saharan Africa. And a lot of the exploration is taking place there along the coastline, and also furthermore. Then where electricity is generated from is from, in terms of gas, where is it mostly used? Again, it's in the Northern Hemisphere where it is to large extent used. And in terms of share of electricity, what component of electricity from gas is, you'll see in the slide here. Okay, so that's basically the gas value chain. And then I thought I'd just take you very quickly through the nuclear value chain. So the nuclear value chain starts with, also you have to do prospecting to find the uranium, and uranium is generally mined in open cast mines like this one. This is the Rossing uranium mine that's just outside Swakopmund in Namibia. And if you look to the left there, you'll see the truck. I don't know if you can see the hard hat of the driver there, but there's a ladder that you climb up to get into the truck. The cars, they have to have a sort of golf ball on the end of an aerial so that these trucks can see it, so that they don't run over them. The trucks are that massive. And so it's a huge operation in terms of soil, and then crushing that soil. And then what comes out of that is a process that refines the uranium into what they call a yellow cake. Yellow cake is then the product that is used to fill rods and then goes into the nuclear plant. And that's basically what the inside of a nuclear plant looks like. The nuclear plant is essentially a big kettle where the heating element is the nuclear rods that heats water that drives turbines. So it's a thermic system, and is controlled by rods going in and out. You'll see there on the left, there is control rods that go in and out that speed up or slow down the nuclear reaction. This is currently the world's biggest nuclear plant that's been built in Flamanville. It's a French thing being done by EDF. And you'll see that it's a massive, gigantic plant that's being built at this point in time. Okay, and then the last sort of aspect of it is that you have waste product. And what you see here is not the high level waste, this is the medium waste. And the pit that you see there is Volpits. It's in the Northern Cape. It's where we put our waste from Koeberg, but it's the medium level waste, not the high level waste. All the high level waste for all the nuclear plants at this point in time are still on site at the nuclear plants, waiting for a long-term solution. We don't have a long-term solution at this point in time. Okay, so that's the nuclear side. And then just to give you some idea around nuclear, is in terms of the industry itself. I just took from the World Nuclear Industry review done by Schneider. It's a very comprehensive review of nuclear. You'll see there just where reactors started up and reactors closure. And you'll see that 1985 is sort of the peak of the industry, and that the industry is now in decline. So there's a lot of nuclear reactors that have been built, but there are not a lot of new nuclear reactors that have been built. And all your plants have a lifetime. And so the lifetime of those plants that were built in 1985, it's around about 40 to 60 years. Those are now starting to come to the end of their life cycle, and we're seeing that they close down. Also, just to say that in terms of a nuclear plant being built, and Mr. Momani is wrong in his thinking that we can supply 5,000 megawatt nuclear plants in 10 years. There are only four countries building nuclear plants at this point in time, and most of those are state-owned corporations. So Russia is Rosatom, China has 2 entities, state entities. France is EDF, and South Korea has 2 that are also involved in that. But there's a limited capability of building nuclear plants, and there's an order book for building. So if you place an order for building a nuclear plant today, you're likely only to have that start happening in about 10 years' time, when the other plants have been built by those countries. So it's a long startup process just in terms of getting it built in the sector. And there you just see some of the units that are under construction as of the moment. So there's 53 under construction, and of those 53, 26 are already behind schedule. And some of those were, the one in America has just been built. It took them something like 20, 25 years to build that nuclear plant. Okay, then just to the earlier point is that the majority of those plants are now starting to age. 165 of those are in 30 to 40 years old, and 97 of those are 40 to 50 years old. And that's when you start turning down your plants and looking for new options. And that's what's happening in Germany at the moment, is that they're shutting down their plants early because they've come to the end of their lifespan and they're no longer economically viable for those ones. Okay. So that roughly gives you an understanding of how the gas value chain works and how the nuclear value chain works, and some idea of the complexity of those industries and how supply works within those industries. And then I just wanted to repeat this slide. So in terms of ideology, when you think about it, there are a couple of things that sort of what I would call sort of fault lines along which these decisions are made. The one is the thing of demand and supply, and I'd taken you through that in the first one. And that was just this idea of a peak load and a base load, the peak load being variable based on when people shower and cook, or when industry starts up, and base load being that 24/7 power that's required. And in South Africa, that is what our demand cycle looks like, because the majority of our electricity is used by industry, not by residents. And so it's when industry starts up and when industry shuts down that drives our demand cycle. So the one key decision factor in how people make choices about energy is the demand versus supply. So you'll have to look at your country's or your city or your home's demand versus supply. A home is a lot easier. So if you're putting solar on the roof, you're not going to have solar delivered to you in the middle of the night. So you can't use that to heat your geyser, anything like that. But if you put batteries in, then that gives you that option. Otherwise, you get your energy during the day. Okay, so and then what's useful to understand is just the source of energy. So in 1965, you'll see there that the majority of our energy came from coal across the world, and that was, from oil, sorry, and then coal. So it was fossil fuels at that point in time. And if you look at it today, again, it's still fossil fuels, but oil is declining, coal has declined, but gas has increased. And so a lot of people argue that gas is what they call a transition energy source, is that you can use it because it doesn't burn. In certain plants, it doesn't burn as badly as coal does. In other plants, it does. But you can use it as a transition across to renewables. That's a bit of a misnomer, but it is what some of the people in some of the industries argue, that you need gas for that. Now, in South Africa's case, we don't have a gas infrastructure. And so we would have to build the infrastructure first before we could use it. And so for us, it doesn't make sense. We could simply just build the same infrastructure for solar and wind, and that would drive our energy supply a lot quicker and better. And then the other factor that you would look at is location. If you look at South Africa, and you'll see I used that grid last time, is that we run a centralized system at the moment. And that's why with Eskom going down, that we have this problem, is that we've generated most of our electricity in the Highveld, close to the coal plants there, the coal deposits that we have there, and then we distribute it across the country. Most of our usage comes from Gauteng, so it's not that far to go, but then we have a massive line that runs all the way down to Cape Town, and then we have lines that branch off. So that's on the left-hand side. If you look on the right-hand side, you'll see that the top diagram is where our best wind sits, and you'll see that our best wind is actually offshore, but we don't have any offshore at the moment because it's economically not as viable as inland. And you'll see that inland, most of our wind lies on the Karoo Mountains or next to the coast. So the sort of Eastern Cape Mountains is where you find most of our wind, and that's where you're seeing a lot of the wind farms are now there at that. That's where a lot of the wind farms are now placed. And then below that is the irradiation map of South Africa, and you'll see that our best sun sits in the Northern Cape. Now, if you look at the wind and irradiation map and you compare it to the grid map that you have on the other side there, you'll see our grid isn't designed for where our wind and where our sun is. It's designed for where our coal is. And the problem with that is that you might be able to build a solar plant in the Northern Cape, but you can't connect it to the grid because there isn't an electricity line or a big enough pipeline in terms of electricity lines that allows you to connect that. So you have the ability to generate there. And so location is a key component in terms of how you design your energy system. And then the other aspect is cost. And there I've just thrown in a couple of cost estimates from different sources. The one is the CSIR, which says very clearly that solar and wind is the least cost option for us. It's going to cost us the least. There's the one there from an energy company in the United States, which shows that onshore wind is, and they call it near firm because that's a battery backup to that. So that's the cheapest versus small modular nuclear reactors is most expensive. Now, again, to Mamani's point about using the modular reactors, if we go that route, and there isn't a commercial one available yet, they'll only come in 2035 roundabout, is that it'll be very expensive energy when it comes in. So you pass that on to your consumer, and your consumer in this case is industry, which makes your industry less competitive on a global basis. And then if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll just see the history of cost, and you'll see that solar, the yellow line there, has started out very expensive. And what happened is that Germany in the late 2000s instituted incentives, and China jumped at the opportunity and created an industry and then started supplying Germany. And Germany has a very big solar production, and particularly rooftop, which drove the market, and that then drove the prices down. So those were the, so let me just take you through those things again. Is the demand and supply is one of the key components. The source of where you get your your energy from is another. And the Middle East, a lot of the politics and conflict has been driven by the discovery of oil there. And in South Africa, we've designed our system based on coal, and that's now creating problems for us in terms of transitioning to renewables, because we don't have the grid, the basic lines to deliver the electricity. And then cost, you'll see that renewables is the least cost option going forward. So I thought that that would just give a very simple framing, and unfortunately there's not a lot, there's so much detail, it's very difficult to decide what detail to share or not to share. But the decisions that are being made by politicians are based on potentially ideological choices. So we know that the ANC government has a very close relationship with the Russian government, and so there's a choice being made around nuclear based on Russia's expanding their nuclear capability across the world in terms of the production plants. So they are the country that is building the most nuclear plants globally, and so that's a key component for them in terms of their expansion across the globe, is the building of nuclear plants, and South Africa is then interested in it. Powership is a Turkish-based company. Again, this is a ship that will sail into port, deliver peaking power for us for a limited period, and then after 20 years, then sail out of our port, and we have no asset left after that. And then Mamani's choices in terms of nuclear, talking about the big build, which was a failure with the coal and isn't possible because we wouldn't be able to be high on the order book. And then the smaller modular reactors, which is a very popular talking point, but isn't practical at this point in time because the technology isn't at a commercial delivery stage yet. And we would also have the same problem as with the big nuclear, is that we would be fairly low down the priority list in terms of who would receive it first. So yeah, I thought what I would do is then just share some of those things there. That was how we were going. That's how we make some of our energy choices, and some of that is shaped by how we see the world and whether we want centralized systems or decentralized systems. So a coal system, a nuclear system, a gas system is centralized. That's how it has to work. Whereas the renewables is decentralized and allows for localized solutions to energy, and there's less control. It enables less control through that system. Awesome. Okay, so I think that Andrea basically is it from me, is that I wanted to just start unpacking some of those drivers of the choices and how they could be influenced by some of the ideological aspects that we're thinking about in terms of how we see it. And the one thing that I wanted to close on is just that when I took us through those slides of the value chain, so if you looked at the oil rig, you see the sunset behind it. They're beautiful pictures of technology, and I'm wondering to myself whether there's an ideological component in energy, is that us as humans like to see our ability to control nature, what we think is our ability to control nature. And that's why we are fascinated with our machines, and why we are less reluctant, or we are reluctant to switch to things like renewables, because our machines, we see less of our machines. So that was just something that I thought about whilst pulling this together. But that's it from me. Thanks, Andrea. Open for questions.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Far too much to gather together. But yeah, if anyone would like to sort of ask questions and all of that, maybe just put your hand up and I will give the floor to you. Okay, so Janet, to kick us off, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Gary, that's really, really useful. I think it's useful to see it more through a political economy lens or analysis than an ideological analysis. So the relation, I mean, political economy is the relationship between resources, I mean, economic resources and the state, like,
yes,
basically. And these kinds of choices are made through a political economy lens, I think. Anyway, it's an interesting issue. So just, I mean, I'm fascinated by who's not attending the seminar. You know, like, who's not here? There's not a single Black student who's attending a seminar, which is on the main topic of the day in the entire country. And why is that? I mean, why are people not engaging in this debate? Is it because of the sort of ideological aversion to this engagement? People have very fixed positions. The other thing that just struck me from your presentation was when you look at the map, the world map, in terms of energy use,
yes,
energy production, CO2 emissions, etc. There's a very, very clear correlation between what is known as development. And I'm in a Department of Development Studies, so I mean, this is what we do, is we critique how development is measured and understood and so on. But basically what people understand by the developed countries in the world are the ones which have used extensively fossil fuel for industrialization, etc., and who are still consuming that at that level. And that is still within, I mean, you talk about ideology, you have to critique the premises of the economic theory that is taught at this university, as in almost all universities in South Africa and in the West, which is a sort of neoclassical economic theory, which has certain ideological premises. And one of those premises is that this is it's a sort of positivist philosophy that there's this development trajectory which countries go through, and somehow we are far behind, like we got stuck. So South Africa is a little bit of an exception in Africa because we were lucky enough to get some mineral resources at an early enough stage to industrialize more than other countries in Africa. But there is an assumption that this is the way we have to go. And I think a lot of the resistance to renewable energy comes from that idea that why should we be stuck in underdevelopment, i.e., the argument of the Walter Rodney and Samira Min and so on, like we are somehow stuck.
yes,
And we now being punished because we are not ahead of the game in terms of renewable energy. So we're being forced to do that. So I thought one of the things you missed out in your analysis there was what is the potential for, in the SADC region in particular, for green industrialization, so that we are developing renewable energy, including green hydrogen, which is quite controversial, which you didn't talk about, but the mineral inputs into those industries, including PV solar, the lithium-ion batteries, as well as the issue of green hydrogen production, that there are certain advantages that Southern Africa has. And SADC is I've just been reading some SADC papers on this, on the mineral value chain for renewable energy production, etc. And there is a real potential there, positive potential. And I think there's an argument for some kind of combination of the sort of, as you say, like the decentralized production through wind, solar, hydro, etc., but combining that with a manufacturing or industrialization program, and the use of the mineral resources which we have. So what I find a little bit frustrating is that there's I think there's a sort of ideological angle to this, but many of the social movements, including the sort of anti-nuclear movement, the climate justice movement, etc., are sort of arguing that extractivism is bad and we shouldn't be using our minerals and we shouldn't be using, exploiting oil and gas and coal, etc. And I think there needs to be a very clear distinction made. So you say, okay, I'm just giving a little sort of my own position on this, but it's that there should be an absolute moratorium on any new fossil fuel production. Okay?
Yes.
So we don't have new oil or gas exploitation at all, or new coal mines for that matter. But nuclear is different, and I think the argument around nuclear is a cost one, as you say. It's like time and cost is, modular reactors are not yet cost effective, etc. But it's not a principle that we shouldn't be doing this, like nuclear is bad. And similarly, green hydrogen, we have to weigh up the cost of it in terms of the minerals that we have available. And whether we can, we don't want to end up just exporting all these minerals to China, and then they make the inputs, then the solar panels become cheaper, and so on. So it's not, it's not developing our industry, but we shouldn't be taking a sort of absolutist anti-extractivist position.
Well, you can't, So the rub of it is that any energy that you produce is produced by an industry, and that industry will have a value chain that starts with some kind of mineral extraction and ends in some kind of waste product, so you have to look at that cycle and see. So my personal position is that you have to find one that is as decentralized as possible and as less impactful on the environment that you can. And I think, so that's why solar and wind for me are good options, because you can decentralize. It's relatively relative to coal and to gas and fossil fuels. It is less harmful to the environment, and your ordinary person can the entry into that industry is a lot easier for your ordinary person. Whereas nuclear, for instance, there's only four countries in the world that are building them because of the excessive cost of it. So South Africa can't get into it. We just don't have the budget for it. So we would have to go to someone else to buy that capability, and then they would do a deal with us. And that generally the deal is the build, own, operate. So you would contract Rosatom to come in and supply you nuclear energy at a certain cost for a 20 to 40 year period, but that locks you in terms of economic options going forward, and so so you have to look at so the timescales in terms of the commitments that you're making are 40 to 60 years. So the politician today who's deciding for his child basically in 40 years time in terms of what energy system is taking place. So I think that's the one point. And then I think, Janet, you're quite right. Mantashe and others use that argument of the North-South very effectively. They say the North used fossil fuels to drive their economies, and they are now rich from extracting the resources from over the world and converting those into economic growth. Why should we, who sit on gas reserves, why should we not be able to do the same? So let's frack the Karoo, and let's extract out of the coast those gas reserves that there are there, because that's how we should drive our economy. But the counter to that, and you're right, is that in the environmental sector we're not very strong in terms of talking about the other aspect of renewables, which is the industrial component of it, which drives the sort of green economy, if you want to call it that. Is that you have to go to a new industrial process. You can't just simply stop the one because your economies are built around that. So you have to replace that one economy with that one industry with a new industry, and that's the just transition thing that we're talking about. So how do you do it? And South Africa has the potential of leapfrogging like the sort of Asian tigers did, is that we don't have to go through the fossil fuel route. We can actually, through renewables, we can create both a green industry for us and a source of energy that is easier to access for the ordinary person. But just to be clear, I mean, that doesn't mean to say that there isn't impact on the environment going forward. And that is fundamentally at the bottom of all of those ideological choices, is this idea that we must grow, that growth can be unfettered, and that we must grow through technology, through energy use. And I'm not sure how we get out of that. And I think that that's really the fundamental thing that's driving it all. Yeah. So thanks, Jan. Thanks for that.
So you looked at steady state economics.
Janet, just stay with us, and maybe we can just bring Alex into the conversation, yeah, just turn it into an actual conversation, which would be kind of interesting.
Go for it, Alex.
Thanks very much. Sorry, I'm on the move, so if my sound quality is a little poor, I hope it's coming through okay.
Where are you, Alex?
No, I'm just in Joburg, but I'm kind of listening while moving, so I hope it's
You sound like you're on the moon.
But anyway, the question was around this issue of centralization, and I think renewables often are seen as like purely decentralized, but that there is a lot of potential for centralization too. And we think a lot of the big wind companies or big state-owned entities, like the Danish big company, is pretty large, pretty state-owned, and so it is potential to have it more decentralized. But there's also opportunities for significant centralization, big mining, and so on. So I think there's often an ideological smokescreen that happens. So I just wondered if you could maybe speak to that and how, like, sometimes the use of like the states or the centralized vision is used to push back against renewables as if it's equivalent with privatization and decentralization, when actually there's a lot more opportunities in diverse ways of implementing renewables. That's kind of the question. Thanks.
So, Alex, yeah, I mean, maybe just to go back to that map that I had of South Africa and where the wind and sun lies in South Africa, is if you look at that, it's very dispersed across the country. So just where your source lies, it's a lot less. It's not as easy to control that as, for instance, coal, which the majority of our resource lies in the Highveld. So the ability to centralize is greater, and that's so generally our centralized system came about because of railways and mines. That's how Eskom was originally set up, is to service the railways and to service the mines. And then it was driven by coal, and so we set up our big plants there, and then the state took that over. But you're quite right. I mean, any energy source can be centralized and is open to that. It's just a typical wind farm is about 100 megawatts, whereas a typical coal plant is, you're looking at, so Medupi is 4,000 megawatts. So there's a lot more power that comes through a coal plant than there does through a wind farm or a solar plant. And so you need a lot more solar and wind, which means that you have to disperse your risk by doing that. So there is an ability. So if you look at our renewable energy IPP program, we have, I think it's over 100 projects. I think it's about 112 projects that each there's a little, not a little, but there's a wind farm or a solar plant attached to that, and that gives you greater opportunity to spread economic benefit than a coal plant, which is 4,000 megawatts. The question in my mind is whether technology is ideologically agnostic, or whether there is certain technologies lean themselves to certain ideologies. And I mean, I take Janet's point that it's a political economy rather than a purely just the political ideology. But I think things like nuclear, for instance, because the resources are concentrated, in oil, for instance, it's more concentrated in the world, it's easier for centralized ideologies to attach themselves to that kind of energy. Whereas Whereas wind and solar, which is more decentralized and more spread, it's easier, and I use easier deliberately. Not that it's a guaranteed, the choices that you make in terms of the systems that you build are guaranteed by the technology.
That's such an interesting question. Won't you go back to your first slide with the ideologies on it?
Sure. There we go. So that was the one there, you know. So if you look at a command economy versus a decentralized one, it's easier for renewables to place itself down here, whereas coal and nuclear are more suited to a command economy type thing. Collective, you know, so for instance, the project that you're running, Janet, is a collective answer. It's easier to do that with a cheaper energy source than it is with a more expensive one, you know, whereas privatization...
It goes right down in that bottom left corner, the sort of anarcho...
Yes.
I mean, no, not quite. But so just think about oil. So oil, which has driven the United States economy and the newly emerging, not the emerging, but the Middle Eastern economies, yes. Oil-based. Yes. So where do they fit in there? They're surely not corporatist, syndicalist.
Yeah,
I mean, oil is driven, like if you go into the center right.
So if you look
British neoliberalism.
But if you compare the oil fields of America versus the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, for instance, the oil fields of America are more dispersed, you know, so your local mom and pop can set up their own oil well, whereas in Saudi Arabia, it's more concentrated and you need more resources to get to it. So you need a bigger budget, and that generally is the state that provides that, you know, so in that sense, you know,
it could be authoritarian neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Or corporate autocracy.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to think where the Middle Eastern oil giants fall into this.
Well, there is certainly autocratic. I'm not sure. Yeah, authoritarian, autocratic. You know, I mean, the nationalists were socialists, national socialists. You know, I don't know if there's the thing there. You know, so I think there's some interesting things to explore in terms of the ideological level, and then the base idea below that. You know, and your comment earlier, Janet, about is that our developmental thinking is premised on this idea of an unlimited ability to grow, whereas we live in a planet that has clear boundaries to it in some respects, but it is a self-perpetuating system in others. You know, so that's part of this complexity around energy, is how exactly we make our choices in terms of how we build our societies based on our energy need, you know, and also the assumption, obviously, that energy is the key to development, is that you can't develop a country without energy, and so how do you deliver the energy then becomes one of the big questions.
Gary, do you want to take your part?
Yeah, I'll stop
off so that we can actually see you in the real ha-ha. Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think so really what I wanted to do, Andrea, with this one is just start tagging that when we talk about energy, that it isn't we're not I don't know if agnostic is the right word, but we're not but your energy discussion comes with baggage, you know, and you need to understand what baggage that you're carrying with you in terms of those things. So I'm a proponent of renewables, but renewables has an industry component to it. You know, there is there are choices that are being made in terms of how, you know, you need minerals for it, you know, and then there's a big debate about wind turbine blades, for instance, is that they're just being put into landfill. They were being put into landfills. They're now being made out of materials that you can recycle, you know, so but that change has come in the industry over the last sort of 10 years.
And solar panels.
Yeah, so solar panels, the same thing, but generally you can recycle most of the components of a solar panel. The critical factor is that it's too expensive to recycle. So it's easier to manufacture a new solar panel. So if you're the manufacturer, you'd rather just buy all your ingredients new than to recycle, which costs you money, you know. So then you need a bit of state intervention to add some cost to that thing to incentivize the recycling, you know. Otherwise So
what do you think we should be advocating for cooking and heating for households?
It's a difficult. We don't have the infrastructure for gas, so we and in America they're starting to ban gas stoves because they've discovered that the breathing in gas whilst cooking isn't such a great thing. So gas is probably not going to be an alternative for us. Wood is the biggest for Africa. Wood and charcoal is the biggest source of energy for cooking at this point in time, you know, but that's decimating
It's a big problem. Yeah.
So look, I mean, there are these innovative solar stoves that are being used, but that's generally a rural solution, and you have to have access to sun, and it's an inconvenient one because you can't always cook when you want to cook, you know. So it comes back to electricity, you know, that electricity is the most efficient way of doing it, and then it comes back to the question of how you generate your electricity. And so for me, it is a renewables spread across different generation methodologies. So like your project linked to rooftops across the cities, linked to solar parks, linked to turbine farms, is the way to go that delivers you electricity to the home. The problem with that obviously is that as soon as you do it on a centralized basis, you have to charge the homeowner for that electricity, and then that's where your inequality systems start kicking in, you know, and the stuff that we were talking about.
It's our industry that uses the most energy anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe the homeowner thing is not such a big deal. To me, it seems like a no-brainer to go the renewables and use a whole lot of different kinds of renewables. So I guess the question would be, why are we not, as a country right now, investing heavily and vigorously in this? Why are we still hovering around nuclear and gas and all of that? It makes no sense. So I think that's maybe part of what the ideology component, it's like when decisions or non-decisions make no sense, then there's an ideological component in it. I don't know if that's that's not
No, I mean, I think
no, then you must argue, what is the ideological component? Because if you talk to people in government now, they will say this is a pragmatic decision. It's based on cost and time and the grid, and what, you know, like a lot of the JETP financing is to expand and reinforce the grid so that it can accept more different forms of energy in it, but it can't at the moment. I mean, so it's really not accurate to say that there's a sort of arbitrary or irrational bias that is saying to people, oh, we don't want renewable energy. It's not the case. I mean, there's a whole government departments who are trying to do the sums on what it's going to cost and how long it will take and all this kind of thing.
Good.
Look, I mean, Janet, I mean, I think to a large extent that that's been worked out, and it is, if you take CSIR, for instance, they've done a lot of research on that, and renewables certainly is the cheaper option to go and the easier and quicker turnaround time.
But they still have to enable the grid to
so that's your key
renewable and distribute it.
Yeah, so there's three basic components to energy system. It's the production of your energy. Well, if you don't include the mining of the minerals and that and the resources. So it's the production of your energy. It's the distribution through the grid of your energy. That's the second component. And then the third component is the sale end of it, which generally in South Africa is, well, it's kind of split between Eskom and municipalities. But in our city's case, for instance, the city sells you power, which they buy from Eskom, which is delivered to them on a centralized grid from power generally produced in the Highveld, in the Gauteng area. So if you as a city want to go off the grid, the problem for Eskom is that they can't finance their grid any longer. So for instance, a farmer sitting in the Free State is getting subsidized electricity because the cities are buying that power. But if you take the city out of it, which is your big purchaser, or your industry out of it, that farmer can't afford the cost of actually what it costs to deliver energy to him. So
it's
those are
interesting how we've gone backwards. I mean, we used to have a power station here in Swartkorps.
Yes.
Which produced electricity for the city.
Well, so a part of Eskom's history is that it's deliberately centralized and it deliberately undercut these power plants. So what it started doing is, in terms of the tariffs that it started charging, is that it undercut the tariffs that were from plants like this. I mean, there's an obvious environmental aspect to it, or health aspect to it, is that this was a coal plant and not a very good coal plant, and so people in KwaNobuhle and Motherwell were then breathing in those fumes, so that's so that you had the same problem as that you have in the Highveld at the moment. But also the cost of it at scale, coal at scale is cheaper than coal at in a small basis, and that's why so nuclear, for instance, you must go 1,000 megawatts or 800 megawatts or 1,000 megawatts or above before it becomes financially viable to run that large system, which means that a city, a house can't buy into that system. You have to have a centralized system for that. So that's part of Mamani's argument in terms of modular reactors, is that he's saying every municipality buys their own modular reactor and runs their own electricity. Part of the problem with that is that you have a national grid. So if I generate electricity here, it goes into the grid, it spreads across the entire grid. You have to then cut off this grid from the national grid, and that creates other problems for you. So it's a fantastic.
They're huge technical decisions.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple as saying, well, we don't like renewable or we don't like nuclear. So just by the way, Andrea, before you close, the PC's Presidential Climate Commission is having a big stakeholder workshop here on the 25th, which is on resilience and whatever for the Nelson Mandela Metro. So if people are interested, all stakeholders should register to attend it.
Yeah, so they might move it out, Janet, by 2 weeks. We're trying to get the mayor there, but
please let them do that, because I'm stuck here. Well, not stuck, but I am in Belgium. So it would be good if it was, when I got back.
I just got the thing yesterday.
They sent it out yesterday. Yeah. So
why would they remove it if they've just sent it out?
Well, because there's been a delay in sending out the invites, and so the people have recommitted elsewhere. So they want the city manager and the mayor there as key, and the mayor is not available, and I'm not sure the city manager. So the 8th of June is the next date that they're looking at. So we probably will send out a new invite. Well, the PCC will send out a new invite over the weekend or Monday.
What is your relationship to it?
Yeah, sorry, I have to say that we're kind of out of time as far as the energy seminar goes. Should we just maybe close that off quick, and then we can chat about maybe it's also be useful to have a feedback session on that conference. So let's just hope it stays. It does have a 2-week stay so that I can attend.
It looks like it will go to that.
Okay, good, excellent.
So we can shut down the seminar, and then Janet will explain to you why I know that. So
Okay, all right. So thank you, Gary. Thank you very much for stepping in. The conversation will continue, but I mean, it feels very frustrating because one actually also needs to have things done. But but thank you so much.
Very, very useful seminars.
Awesome.